Okay, so hopefully you watched part one of adding and subtracting integers. This is going into more complicated scenarios in which when we're adding and subtracting integers and how to deal with those scenarios. I want to talk about a symbol that we've all known and seen for a while. It's this symbol here. Many of us know this as a subtraction symbol, which is true. We can also think of it as a negative symbol, which is also true. But I would like to discuss this symbol and how it can be looked at as the opposite of a number. So I want us to consider the number 3. And if we look at the number line, the number 3 is over here. If I were to plot a point there, it is to the right of the 0. If I were to put this symbol in front of it, that actually means the opposite of positive 3. If I take the opposite of positive 3, that's going to take me all the way to the other side, and you will notice that is where negative 3 exists. We might say it as negative 3, or you can actually say it as the opposite of 3. Okay, so the next scenario I'd like to discuss is what happens if I actually put a negative in front of a negative 3. You can actually think of this actually as the opposite of negative 3. And so if I start at negative 3 and I go to the opposite side here, you'll notice that a negative and a negative is going to actually give me a positive 3, and we can even put a plus sign here in front. What I want you to notice here is that these two negatives right next to each other, there is no number in between, and therefore a negative and a negative are going to equal a positive because the opposite of negative 3 actually becomes positive 3. Another scenario we can look at is a scenario in which we have a positive 3 and we place the opposite symbol on this. This is actually related to our first scenario where I discussed this idea of an opposite. And so if I have the opposite of positive 3, that's going to take me from positive 3 to negative 3. Thus, my answer is going to be negative 3. You will notice here that these two symbols are right next to each other. There is no number in between. It is simply the opposite of a positive, or we can also say a negative and a positive are going to give me a negative. Okay, so the last special case I want to discuss is a scenario in which I actually put a plus sign in front of a negative 3. This is related to the previous situation that we dealt with, in which we had a positive and a negative next to each other. Once again, you can just think of this as the opposite of a positive number. If we think about the opposite of a positive number, we're going to go from positive 3 to negative 3. And so in this scenario here, if I add a negative 3, this is the same as actually subtracting a 3. You will notice here that there is no number in between the plus and the minus, and so when we go from that plus and minus, we're going to go straight to that minus sign there. Okay, so I'd like to end this video pretty quickly here by just going over 4 scenarios that we can have. We have both the number 3 and the number 5 up here, in which we have positive and negative values that are going to be affected here. So in this first scenario here, I want you to notice here what I have is I have a positive and a negative next to each other. This means the opposite of a positive. The opposite of a positive is a negative symbol. I can go ahead and recopy the 3 and recopy the 5. And if I ask for the solution of that, 3 minus 5 is going to give me a negative 2. The second scenario here is I have a negative and a negative. In other words, the opposite of a negative number is a positive number. And so I can go ahead and rewrite this as 3 plus 5. And this is going back to our addition, in which these are all positive values, and therefore I'm going to end up with an answer of 8. The third scenario here is, once again, I have a negative and a positive symbol. That negative and positive literally translates as the opposite of a positive. The opposite of a positive is a negative, and therefore this can be written as 3 minus 5. And of course, 3 minus 5 is going to give me negative 2. And the last scenario, which I didn't discuss earlier, but I do want to just touch on it very, very quickly, is if I actually add a positive. There is no opposites happening here. And so if you have a plus plus scenario, it kind of looks funny, but that positive and positive is going to stay a positive value, in which this scenario here, 3 plus 5, is going to give me a positive 8. Hopefully this has helped you with adding and subtracting integers. I hope you have a great day.